Have you ever wondered why stone castles in movies always look so gloomy and cold? In reality, the situation was even harsher, as the massive walls acted like a giant refrigerator, sucking the heat out of any living creature inside. The owners of these fortresses had to fight the laws of physics just to keep from freezing to death in their own bedrooms. Watch the video to the end to find out how medieval architects used hot stones instead of radiators, and what secret allowed kings to sleep warmly while blizzards raged outside.
The Lord requires warmth by winter.
What if I told you that everything you believed about the primitiveness of the Middle Ages is not true? The most impressive and forgotten technology was the Hipparcos system, which medieval engineers borrowed from the Romans and perfected. It was a complex network of cavities and channels laid directly inside massive stone floors and walls. In the basement of the castle, usually under the main hall, a huge furnace was built, in which a fire was kept burning around the clock. The hot air and smoke from this furnace did not escape immediately, but was directed into special cavities under the floor of the upper floors. The stones heated up, turning the floor into a huge heat-radiating surface. One of the most striking examples of the use of this technology is Marienburg Castle, built by the Teutonic Knights. Their engineers used special stones in the furnace that accumulated heat and released it into the duct system for many hours. This saved a huge amount of firewood, which was a valuable resource. Unlike a fireplace, which only heats what is directly in front of it, the Hipparcos created a uniform thermal background. The walls, heated from the inside, ceased to act as refrigerators and began to release the accumulated heat back into the room. This created a unique microclimate that was not available in ordinary fortresses. Special dampers were used to regulate the temperature, which could be used to block the flow of hot air. The servants responsible for heating had to have the skills of real engineers to operate this complex system. A mistake could lead to overheating of the stone and cracking of the floors, or conversely, to the cooling of the rooms. Unfortunately, the construction of such systems was an incredibly expensive and labor-intensive process, accessible only to the wealthiest orders and kings. Most castles could not afford such luxury and relied on simpler methods. In addition, repairing the channels hidden in the walls required partial dismantling of the building. Over time, the secrets of proper air duct construction were lost, and architects moved on to simpler solutions. The efficiency of the Hipparcos was forgotten, giving way to fireplaces, which were easier to build but much less efficient. We lost the technology of warm floors for several centuries. Today, archaeologists find the remains of these systems in the ruins of ancient castles, marveling at their complexity and sophistication. This proves that comfort was important to people at all times, and they were willing to spend enormous amounts of money to ensure it. What do you think? Could modern builders create such a system without using electricity and pumps? Write your opinion in the comments. It's a very interesting topic to discuss. Are you ready to learn the truth about how one pipe changed the entire architecture of Europe? Before the invention and widespread use of chimneys, castles were heated by an open hearth in the center of the hall, and the smoke escaped through a hole in the roof. This was extremely inefficient. Most of the heat escaped into the sky along with the smoke, and the room was constantly smoky. The advent of the wall-mounted fireplace with a chimney was a real technological breakthrough at the time. Engineers learned how to create a draft that pulled the smoke outside, leaving the heat inside the room. This made it possible to move the heat source from the center of the room to the wall and free up useful space. The mantelpiece and the tapered smoke collector were not just decorative elements, but complex aerodynamic devices. They had to be designed so that the smoke would not spill back into the room when the wind blew. Master masons kept the secrets of the correct proportions of the fireplace a closely guarded secret. The masonry of the back wall of the fireplace was often made of special materials capable of withstanding extremely high temperatures. It heated up and acted as a heat shield, reflecting infrared radiation deep into the room. Sometimes cast iron plates were used to enhance this effect. Chimneys made it possible to build multi-story castles, placing fireplaces one above the other and connecting their flues. Now it was possible to heat not only the main hall, but also the feudal lord's private quarters on the upper floors. This radically changed the layout of living quarters and the level of privacy. However, the first fireplaces had a significant drawback. They sucked warm air out of the room along with the smoke. To compensate for this, people had to sit as close to the fire as possible, literally roasting on one side and freezing on the other. The efficiency of such heating rarely exceeded 15%. To improve draft and protect against precipitation, special caps and weather vanes were installed on the tops of the pipes. These elements often became works of art, decorating the silhouette of the castle. But their main function was purely utilitarian, to prevent the wind from blowing out the fire. Cleaning such chimneys was dangerous and dirty work, but vital for the safety of the castle. The accumulated soot could flare up at any moment, causing a fire inside the stone wall. Therefore, the profession of chimney sweep was one of the most sought after and important. Over time, the design of fireplaces became more complex. They became deeper and wider, allowing whole logs to be burned. This made it possible to keep the fire going all night without having to add wood every hour. The fireplace became the heart of castle life, a place where family and guests gathered. But even the largest fireplace could not warm the air in the far corners of huge stone halls. How did the inhabitants of castles cope with the cold that emanated from the walls themselves? You will find the answer to this question in the next chapter.
Tapestries certainly hold the warmth against the
What if I told you that the main decorations in castles were actually purely technical devices? I am talking about tapestries, which we are accustomed to perceiving exclusively as objects of art and symbols of luxury. In fact, their main function was much more prosaic and important: to insulate the icy stone walls. Stone has high thermal conductivity, instantly absorbing heat from the air and cooling the room. A thick wool tapestry created a physical barrier between the cold stone and the living space. It was a kind of second wall, soft and warm. The secret to its effectiveness was the air layer that remained between the fabric and the wall. Air is an excellent heat insulator, and this stagnant layer prevented heat from escaping into the masonry. In fact, it was the medieval equivalent of modern plasterboard with insulation. Tapestries were woven from thick wool, which is excellent at retaining heat. The thicker and denser the fabric, the better it protected against the cold coming from the walls. In wealthy castles, such fabrics were used to hang on all walls from floor to ceiling, creating a room within a room. The fabrics also helped to combat drafts that penetrated through microscopic cracks in the masonry. They blocked the flow of cold air, preventing it from circulating around the room and cooling it down. Without tapestries, it would have been practically impossible to stay in the castle in winter. These soft walls also improved the acoustics, eliminating the echoes characteristic of stone rooms. This made the environment more cozy and comfortable for living and conversation. The psychological effect of seeing warm fabric instead of gray stone also played a role. Tapestries were mobile. When the owner of the castle moved to another residence, he often took them with him. It was a portable heating system that could be quickly deployed anywhere. The walls remained bare and cold, but the comfort moved with the owner. The production of one large tapestry could take years of work by an entire team of weavers. This made them incredibly expensive, sometimes more expensive than the stone from which the castle was built. The presence of many tapestries spoke not so much of a love of art as of a desire not to freeze. The subjects depicted on tapestries were also important, but functionality always came first. That is why they were so large and heavy, because thin silk fabric would not have provided any thermal effect. It was a heavy industry of medieval comfort. Today we look at them in museums, unaware that what we see before us is ancient insulation. If you like this fact about the dual purpose of art, be sure to like this video. I discovered this by accident while studying old inventory lists of castle property covered in centuries-old dust. It turned out that portable braziers played a huge and often underestimated role in heating the icy stone halls. In the documents, they were often referred to as braziers, and were mobile heat sources that could be placed anywhere in the room. They were massive metal baskets or bowls on high legs, filled to the brim with red glowing coals. They made it possible to not depend on a stationary fireplace, which often only heated one wall. Braziers made it possible to create local areas of comfortable warmth exactly where it was vitally necessary at any given moment. They were placed next to the Lord's writing desk so that his ink and fingers would not freeze. They were moved closer to the deep armchair by the bed, or even brought into the cold bathroom before washing. It was a real spot heating system that obediently followed a person throughout the castle. Servants carried them from room to room, creating a thermal cocoon around their master. The main technological advantage of such braziers was the almost complete absence of acrid smoke. The secret lay in the fuel. They did not use ordinary firewood, but specially prepared charcoal. This charcoal, pre-burned in pits, burned very cleanly, giving off a strong and even heat. At the same time, there was no visible flame or flying soot that could damage tapestries. This allowed them to be used in tightly closed rooms where there were no chimneys at all. However, this convenient technology concealed a deadly danger, the nature of which was only vaguely understood at the time. Smoldering coals in a closed space actively emitted carbon monoxide, a silent killer. It has no color or smell, but kills a person imperceptibly, plunging them into eternal sleep. The inhabitants of castles often suffered from headaches and weakness, attributing this to the weather or the evil eye. To avoid poisoning in any way possible, strongly scented aromatic herbs were added to the rooms. Servants carefully monitored ventilation, opening doors if the air became too heavy and stuffy. Braziers were often made of expensive copper or bronze, as these metals heated up quickly. They gave off heat into the surrounding space, working like batteries. Richly decorated items were adorned with intricate engravings and the owner's coat of arms, and were a source of pride and envy for guests. But touching such hot metal could cause severe burns, which in those days could be fatal. For safety reasons, hot braziers were always placed on special stone or thick metal stands. This was necessary to avoid accidentally burning the wooden floor or expensive carpet. An accidentally overturned brazier could cause a terrible fire that would destroy the castle faster than any enemy siege. Therefore, special servants were always on duty to watch over these fiery baskets. There were also very small hand warmers filled with hot coals that could be carried around. Noble ladies often hid them in the deep folds of their voluminous dresses, creating a personal microclimate. This allowed them not to shiver from the cold during long winter receptions. Priests used similar devices in the form of metal balls to warm their hands during endless services. In huge and cold Gothic cathedrals, this was the only salvation for numb fingers. The use of charcoal braziers made it possible to significantly save the main supply of firewood for fireplaces. The fact is that dense coals smoldered for a very long time and provided stable heat for many hours. This was critically important during a prolonged siege or at the end of winter. The efficiency of this heating method was surprisingly high for its time. Dozens of such braziers were placed in large banquet halls, creating a kind of thermal barrier. They formed a glowing dotted line between the guests and the icy air of the huge room. This created a pleasant illusion of warmth, even though the far walls remained covered with frost. People literally huddled around these islands of salvation, trying not to leave the circle of light and warmth. But if the braziers warmed the air, what protected people from the icy cold coming from below, from the ground? In the next chapter, you will learn how ordinary grass saved the lives of kings. The floors in medieval castles were almost always made of stone or cold ceramic tiles. In winter, this dense material cooled down so much that it could literally draw heat out of a person through the soles of their feet. Even thick leather shoes did not protect against the piercing cold coming from the castle's foundations. Walking on such a floor was not only an unpleasant ordeal, but also dangerous to health. It threatened pneumonia, rheumatism, and other diseases that could not be treated at the time. A brilliant and simple solution was a thick mat made of dry reeds, straw, or meadow grasses. This plant carpet tightly covered the floors in all the living quarters of the castle. This layer of porous organic material worked as an excellent natural insulator. It reliably separated the inhabitants' feet from the icy stone, creating an air cushion. The thickness of such a covering in winter could reach several centimeters. Peasants harvested huge quantities of reeds for flooring at the end of summer in swamps and rivers. Then they dried them in the sun for a long time to make the stems light and brittle. The hollow structure of the stems created a porous layer filled with air, which ensured the preservation of precious heat. In essence, it was a medieval prototype of modern carpet or insulation. Fragrant lavender, mint, meadowsweet, and other aromatic herbs were often added to simple straw for the nobility. When walking, the dry stalks broke underfoot and released essential oils. These scents overpowered the unpleasant smells of dampness, cooking, and unwashed bodies. This created not only thermal comfort, but also the necessary aromatic comfort in a cramped space. However, there was a downside to this, related to hygiene. The dirty top layer of reeds was regularly swept away and replaced with a new, fresh, and clean one. In the reception rooms, they tried to do this often before each important reception of guests. But in less important rooms, the old dirty layer could simply be covered with fresh straw. Because of this, the lower layers began to rot and decay, releasing a small amount of additional heat, like in a compost heap. This added to the temperature in the room, but created a favorable environment for insects and mice. Therefore, castles always kept many cats, and servants periodically carried out a general cleaning. In winter, animal skins or heavy woolen rugs could be laid on top of the reeds. This created effective multi-layered protection that allowed people to survive the most severe frosts. The richer and more noble the owner of the castle, the more layers separated his feet from the cold stone. In the royal chambers, this pie on the floor could be very complex and expensive. Only the softest, most delicate, and cleanest types of herbs and flowers were used in the bedrooms. This was done so that it would be comfortable to walk barefoot on the floor when getting out of bed. This was critically important, as the morning chill of the stone could instantly deprive one of sleep and comfort. The floor covered with herbs became the only relatively warm surface in the entire room. Over time, the technology improved, and people began to weave dense mats from reeds. Weaving mats made the flooring more durable, beautiful, and neat. Such mats were much easier to clean, roll up, and shake out in the yard than to clean up loose straw. They became a sign of a more civilized and clean lifestyle in the late Middle Ages. Interestingly, this technology also helped to combat the constant dampness that rose from the basements. Dry straw eagerly absorbed excess moisture from the air, making the indoor climate slightly drier. This significantly reduced the risk of colds and lung diseases among the castle's inhabitants. In large, noisy banquet halls, a thick layer of straw served another important function. It absorbed spilled wine, grease, and food scraps that guests threw to the dogs under the table. This greatly simplified cleaning up after lively celebrations. The dirty straw was simply raked up with shovels and burned. It was a versatile, very cheap, and environmentally friendly solution to many everyday problems of the time. Simple dry grass proved to be an absolutely indispensable element of complex castle engineering. What you never saw in movies about knights was the real and exhausting struggle to keep windows airtight. Window openings in medieval castles were originally just narrow loopholes without glass, through which the icy wind freely blew inside. Real transparent glass was incredibly expensive and rare in those days, comparable in price to precious stones. Only the richest cathedrals or royal palaces could afford to glaze their windows, and even then, not all at once. The average feudal lord looked at the world through an open hole in the wall. Therefore, most windows in living quarters were closed with massive wooden shutters made of thick planks. These shields provided reliable protection from the wind, but at the same time completely blocked out the sunlight. In winter, the inhabitants of the castle faced a difficult and unpleasant choice every day. They had to choose between sitting in complete darkness, but in relative warmth, or in daylight, but with a terrible draft. The shutters were fitted as tightly as possible to the frame, but treacherous gaps still remained. To let in at least some light, they used ingenious substitutes for glass that were available at the time. Most often, these were oiled cloth, thin parchment, or specially treated ox bladders, tightly stretched over wooden frames. These materials were only semi-transparent and gave off a dim, yellowish, and diffused light, similar to twilight. But their main advantage was that they created a physical barrier against the wind. although of course they did not retain heat as well as solid wood. Oiled cloth or canvas was strong enough to withstand strong gusts of wind and driving rain. A layer of grease or oil repelled water, preventing the material from quickly becoming wet and torn from dampness. However, such improvised windows had to be replaced regularly. Over time, the oil went rancid, and the fabric itself became cloudy, covered with dirt, and cracked in the cold. In wealthier and more comfortable homes, a combined window protection system was used. The upper part of the window was covered with a frame made of translucent material to let in light, and the lower part was covered with solid wooden shutters. This allowed for some control over the flow of cold air and the amount of light in the room. All the gaps between the wooden frame and the uneven stone wall were carefully caulked with sheep's wool or dry moss. It was a never-ending battle against microscopic drafts. Mica was another more expensive alternative to fabric, as it was more transparent and durable. But in nature, mica occurs in small pieces, so it had to be assembled into a single sheet. Small pieces of mica were painstakingly fastened together with lead bindings, creating a complex and fragile mosaic. But even a mica window, due to its many joints, could not provide perfect airtightness for a room. Heavy curtains hung directly over the window openings served as an additional and very important line of defense against the cold. They were made of very thick wool, cloth, or velvet, and were closed tightly when darkness fell. The fabric had to completely cover the opening, touching the floor and the edges of the wall. This created another insulating air layer between the icy window and the room. The window niches in thick walls were often equipped with stone benches, which were beautifully called window seats. It was a romantic place in summer, but in winter the stone exuded a grave cold. To sit there during the cold season, the stone was covered with thick cushions and fur skins. But even with such serious insulation, the window area always remained the coldest and most uncomfortable part of the room. Only with the development of technology did real glass, accessible to castles, gradually begin to appear. At first, these were small round discs with a thickening in the center, so-called moon glass. Windows made of such discs resembled the bottoms of bottles and greatly distorted the view outside. Only with the advent of affordable sheet glass were castles finally able to fill with light without losing precious heat. But before this happy moment, eternal darkness was the inevitable price for warmth. But even carefully sealed windows could not warm the vast spaces of the main halls. How did medieval architects solve the problem of heating giant rooms with high ceilings? The answer is simple. They built a house inside a house. What does this mean? You will find out in the next chapter. In the huge and cold castle complex, there were always special small rooms that were much easier to heat. They were called by the beautiful word solar, which comes from the Latin sol, meaning sun. They served as private and intimate quarters for the castle owner and his immediate family. These were perhaps the most comfortable, warm, and cozy places in the entire impregnable fortress. Here one could temporarily forget the harsh reality of the stone bag. Solar rooms were usually located on the upper floors of towers or residential buildings. This was done not only for the view, but also because warm air naturally rises from the lower levels. Their windows were deliberately oriented strictly to the south to catch maximum sunlight. This allowed the room to heat up naturally even on frosty days. It was an early and intuitive example of the use of passive solar energy in architecture. The dimensions of the solarium were deliberately modest in contrast to the gigantic reception halls. The ceilings here were made significantly lower so that warm air would not rise high up where it is useless. A small volume of air warmed up much faster from the fireplace and cooled down more slowly at night. The walls here were often covered with wooden panels, which were much warmer to the touch than bare, damp stone. It was in the solar that the feudal family spent most of the winter, sheltering from the cold. Here they did needlework, read books, played chess, or simply socialized in a small circle. All real life was concentrated in this room, while the huge main hall stood cold and empty. It was a sensible survival strategy through a temporary reduction in the living space used. The entrance to the solarium was often closed with double doors or heavy curtains, creating a kind of vestibule. This prevented the icy air from the corridors from rushing in when the door was opened. A person would first step behind the curtain, close the door, and only then enter the room. Every detail of the interior, even the smallest, was designed to conserve precious heat. The finest luxury items that the owners could afford were also concentrated here. The most expensive and dense tapestries hung on the walls, and the floors were covered with the thickest oriental carpets. The solar was a true oasis of comfort and softness in the midst of a harsh and rough stone fortress. It was here, and only here, that one could afford to take off one's heavy outer clothing on the fur. Even during the construction phase, architects tried to position the solar so that it was protected from the wind. It was covered by other, less important buildings of the castle or walls, creating a wind shadow. The walls of this room were often made thicker than usual or placed inside the most powerful towers. This significantly reduced heat loss through the masonry, acting like a thermos. Sometimes the solar had direct access to the kitchen or was deliberately located directly above it. This allowed for additional heat from the huge kitchen stoves that were constantly working below. It was a very successful engineering solution, using the waste heat from cooking to heat the living quarters. The smells of food and smoke were considered a lesser evil compared to the piercing cold. For women, children, and the elderly, the solar was the main place of permanent residence in winter. It was their own kind of warm safety zone, which they rarely left. Men, on the other hand, were forced to leave this refuge more often to manage the castle, train, and engage in military affairs. But by evening, everyone wanted to return to the solar, which was the true heart of family life. This ancient concept of zoning and separating the warm core from the cold periphery is still relevant today. It is actively used in modern energy-efficient construction and passive house design. Medieval builders intuitively understood the basic principles of thermodynamics without any formulas. They did not try to fight the cold everywhere. They simply retreated intelligently to pre-prepared shelters. At night, when the fire in the large fireplaces inevitably burned out, the temperature in the huge bedroom dropped rapidly. The stone walls began to give off the accumulated cold, and the air became icy. To avoid freezing to death in their sleep, the inventive medieval people came up with a bed with a thick canopy. It was not just a beautiful element of meaningless luxury, but a real and complex architectural structure. Its main purpose was to preserve precious heat around the sleeping person. The canopy was a massive wooden frame on which heavy, thick curtains were hung. They were usually made of thick wool, cloth, or expensive velvet that did not let air through. When the curtains were drawn tightly at night, a closed space was formed around the sleeping person. The warmth of the human body was no longer wasted throughout the huge room. It remained securely inside this cozy fabric cocoon. The upper part of the canopy, called the sky, served as a roof for this structure. It reliably blocked the flow of warm air, preventing it from escaping upward to the high-vaulted ceilings. The result was a kind of dense tent set up right inside the cold stone room. Thanks to this, the temperature difference inside the canopy and outside could be quite significant. Several people could sleep inside such a warm shelter at the same time, huddling together. Spouses slept together not only for emotional closeness, but also for the sake of survival. On a freezing night, a single person froze much faster than a couple. The warmth of a living human body was the most reliable and safest heater in those days. The fabrics for winter canopies were chosen to be the densest and heaviest, and were often lined with fur. They were richly decorated with gold embroidery and coats of arms, but their primary function was always to retain heat. Light silk summer fabrics were always removed for the winter and replaced with winter sets. This ritual of changing the bedding marked the arrival of real cold weather. Before bedtime, servants would carefully slide a brazier with coals inside the closed canopy. It was left there for a short time to warm up the stagnant air before the arrival of the owners. The main thing was not to forget to remove the dangerous fire in time before going to bed. This created the necessary supply of heat for the first, coldest half of the night. The thick canopy of the bed also reliably protected the defenseless sleepers from insidious drafts. These air currents constantly flowed through the bedroom, penetrating through the cracks in the shutters. In addition, the fabric protected against spiders and insects that could fall from the dark ceiling beams. It was truly a multifunctional protective device for comfortable sleep. The feeling of security in such a soft, enclosed space was maximum. The royal beds were true works of art in enormous structures. There was so much space inside them that you could even sit there and receive visitors. It was objectively the warmest place in the entire huge palace in winter. Therefore, monarchs often held official morning audiences there without getting out from under the blanket. Receiving guests while lying in bed was not a whim, but a harsh necessity. Without such closed canopies, survival in a stone castle in winter would have been extremely difficult. This room within a room allowed people to survive the darkest hours of the night. At that time, the temperature in the room could drop to 0 or even below. It was the last and most reliable line of defense for humans against the deadly cold. In addition to the air inside the canopy, it was necessary to heat the bed itself. During the day, in an unheated room, the bedding and sheets became icy and unpleasantly damp. To solve this problem, special ingenious devices called bed warmers were used. These were usually wide copper or brass containers with a long wooden handle. Coals were poured into this flat container, which resembled a large frying pan with a perforated lid. They were taken directly from the fireplace, choosing those that gave off even heat without a flame. The maid slowly moved this warmer up and down between the icy sheets. She carefully ironed and warmed the bedding just before her employers went to bed. The metal quickly released the accumulated heat, drying the inevitable dampness of the fabric. Steam began to rise from the sheets, and the bed became warm and cozy. The long handle was necessary to move the hot water bottle across the entire surface of the huge bed. Without it, it was impossible to reach the middle of the bed without risking burns or climbing into bed with your feet. This procedure required a certain amount of skill and attention from the maid. If the hot water bottle was accidentally left in one place for too long, disaster was inevitable. It was easy to scorch the expensive linen sheets or even burn the feather bed. Therefore, the movements had to be smooth and continuous. A simpler and more affordable option for heating was ordinary heated stones or bricks. They were heated for a long time in an open hearth until they gained enough heat. Then they were tightly wrapped in several layers of woolen cloth or rags. This warm bundle was placed directly under the feet under a heavy blanket. Natural stone or fired clay had a high heat capacity. Such a heat accumulator could gradually give off gentle heat until morning. This allowed the feet to stay warm, even when the air in the room had cooled down completely. In the morning, the cooled stones still retained the remnants of yesterday's fire. Thick-walled ceramic flasks filled with hot water were also used. These were the direct ancestors of our modern rubber hot water bottles. The dense ceramic held heat well and was safer than open smoldering coals. However, it could crack unexpectedly from boiling water, flooding the bed with water. Such warmers were often made in a special anatomical shape for ease of use. Heated bricks were a real salvation for the ordinary inhabitants of the castle. Servants and soldiers did not have expensive copper hot water bottles, but there were enough stones for everyone. They were also wrapped in rags to prevent the skin from being burned by the hot surface. People hugged these stones in their sleep as if they were the most precious treasure in the world. They were the only personal source of heat for the entire long winter night. There were even special designs that were jokingly called monks. These were wooden frames with a pot of coals safely placed in the center. This woven structure was placed entirely under the blanket, creating a dome of warm air. The wooden frame prevented the blanket fabric from touching the coals and catching fire. A well-heated bed was not just a matter of comfort for spoiled gentlemen. It helped a person fall asleep faster and conserve the energy of an exhausted body. Lying down in an icy bed meant losing precious body heat to warm it up. This could quickly lead to hypothermia and serious illness. In the morning, the cooled stones, flasks, and hot water bottles were removed from the bedrooms. In the evening, the heating ritual had to be repeated over and over again. It was an endless cycle of struggle for warmth, which took up a lot of the servants' time. Dozens of people worked hard every day to ensure their masters slept comfortably. These simple household items, such as bricks, flasks, and pans with coals, were important. They were as important tools for survival as a sharp sword or a sturdy shield. They protected people from an enemy that no weapon could kill, the deadly cold.
catching. Yes, chef.
The warmest and most desirable place in any medieval castle was always the kitchen. Huge ovens and giant stone hearths, where whole animal carcasses were roasted, burned here almost around the clock. This created a powerful and constant source of heat, which architects tried to use wisely. Unlike living rooms, where fireplaces were used sparingly, here fire was a production necessity. The heat here was so intense that cooks worked in light shirts even in winter. Kitchens were often deliberately located so that the precious heat from them would spread to adjacent rooms. Architects planned the building so that servants' quarters or even guest rooms could be located above the kitchen. These rooms were naturally heated by rising hot air and chimneys. It was a primitive but effective natural central heating system of the time. It worked flawlessly as long as food was being prepared in the kitchen. On the coldest and windiest nights, many servants and even poor household members would go down to sleep in the kitchen. Sleeping next to a huge cooling stove was much more comfortable than shivering in icy rooms under the roof. People would lie down right on the floor, spreading straw or raincoats, closer to the source of heat. The kitchen spontaneously became the center of nightlife in the castle and a dormitory during the winter. Here, social boundaries were erased in the face of a common enemy, the cold. The massive brick or stone arches of the ovens acted as giant batteries, storing enormous amounts of energy. Even when the open fire went out, the hot stones continued to radiate gentle heat for many hours. This physical phenomenon of thermal inertia was vital for saving firewood at night. Bakers often used this residual heat to let dough rise overnight. The stone released the accumulated sun's heat slowly and evenly. Excess heat from the kitchen was also actively used to heat large amounts of water for bathing. In those days, this was a rare, technically complex and labor-intensive procedure. Carrying hot water in buckets to the Lord's remote chambers was difficult, and it cooled quickly. Therefore, people often washed in wooden tubs right here in the warmth of the kitchen space. The kitchen was forced to serve as a dining room, a bathhouse, and a bedroom for the lower classes. The stone walls adjacent to the wide chimneys of the kitchen stoves were always pleasantly warm to the touch. Beds, chests, or benches in the adjacent living quarters were placed against these heated walls. These were the most desirable and comfortable places to put furniture in the entire castle. Pets, especially cats and dogs, unerringly found these comfortable areas. Often there was an unspoken struggle among the inhabitants for the right to sleep by the warm wall. The kitchen was the only place in the fortress where life-saving warmth was always guaranteed. It was there as long as the castle had food supplies and dry firewood. It was the fortress's real energy reactor, sustaining life throughout the huge stone building. If the kitchen stopped working, the castle would die and freeze in a matter of days. The fire in the hearth was a symbol of life in the truest sense of the word. How do you think you would fare spending even one winter in a real medieval castle with all its drafts and icy floors? Or have modern conveniences spoiled us too much? Which of the technologies described did you find the most ingenious and unexpected?